Welcome back to Melbourne Property TV. Time now for the panel, and we're talking how Melbourne property prices have changed over the past 50 years. We've got the big guns in. Tim Fletcher from Fletcher Real Estate. How long have you been in the industry?
45 years.
All right, you're the best qualified to talk about.
Don't ask me that question.
Robert LaRocca from the REIV, and for WBP Property Group, Greville Pabst. Now, gentlemen, who wants to kick off? We probably should defer to you, Tim, 45 years in the business.
The senior member of the panel,
Senior member of the panel. I guess over time, compounding and everything else, is it that much of a surprise where we are now with a median house price of anywhere up to $600,000 in Melbourne?
Well, I think if you asked that question 45, 50 years ago, you'd say it's not possible. I brought with me today a sale we made in 1962, which is 45 years ago, for $13,400 it was. It was actually in pounds, but you convert it. That property today would be worth about $1.2 million just for the land. Now, if I'd said that to you all those years ago, you would have laughed me out of town.
All right, what will it be worth in 45 years, that block, if it's 1.2 now?
Well, if we're going to be realistic about it, maybe it's worth $2.5–3 million then.
Yeah.
But, you know, if I said that to you now, you'd probably laugh at me, you know, and say it's not possible.
Greville, you're a man with an eye on the future all the time. We're talking such astronomical growth. Where's it all going to end?
Well, I wasn't born 50 years ago, Des, but no. I can certainly reflect on my career over the last 25 years, and you know, I can remember even the median house price in Footscray, which in 1985 was 53 grand, and it's now $550,000. And same can be said of the inner city of Melbourne. You know, there wasn't all that popular areas like, you know, Carlton, Richmond, and Clifton Hill, and Fitzroy, where the median house price in 1985 in those suburbs are, you know, sort of around the mid-80,000s.
Even Port Melbourne was a similar?
Yeah, the same. And those suburbs now, the median house price is $825,000. So there's been enormous change and a shift in the demographics that have driven a lot of things have happened. You know, like 1983 we had the deregulation of the financial markets, and certainly that had a big effect on the availability of money and people being able to use more different ways of financing and getting into property. So there's been a lot of changes over the last 50 years that have really has caused that
and growth. Also people viewing property 40, 50 years ago was something you bought and settled in and paid off for 50 years or 30 years. Nowadays, people are using money to buy more than 1, 2, 3 properties. There's investments, superannuation.
Certainly, there's certainly a lot more investment. And the way I think Melbourne has changed is that Melbourne was really a donut city in the 1970s. And if you look at Mount Waverley and Glen Waverley, where the VFL ended up building Waverley Park out there, and that was because that was the centre of Melbourne. Now the shift has moved right into the CBD. Everybody wants to live in the CBD. Melbourne is a world city now. It's not unlike Rome or London or Paris. Everybody wants to live close to the CBD. So that's really the biggest change that I've seen in the last 30 years.
Now, you're the young man of the panel, Robert. What?
Well, I can say my parents bought their first house in the early 70s for $16,000 in Fawkner, but more
Near
interest.
The cemetery?
Across the road,
yeah.
A bit, little house, as those things were. I mean, they were smaller houses then too. You were buying a smaller house. But the real issue is, the cost of money and inflation over that time. When we look back in time, our median prices go back to the late 60s, $9,500. But in the 70s, the median house price went up threefold. In the 80s, it was about 150%, and then about 100% over the last decade. Sometimes we talk about fantastical sums of money, 300% appreciation over a 10-year period. Sounds great, but it doesn't really mean a lot if the inflation rate was doing what it was doing in the 70s. All these things are relative. The real signal there is prices go up alongside the economy. The economy's performing well, they perform well. If inflation's up, house prices go up as well. You can't really, separate the two.
So you're saying it did what it had to do in accordance with what the economy was doing?
Well, exactly. People's wage rates were going up higher in the early 70s because of the, inflation that was driving them spending more money on housing. Housing went up 20% over and over and over again. The last decade's been more moderate, particularly as we've seen, about 50 grand come off the median house price this year. And, over time, moderate growth on a sustainable basis is really better than, talking in fantastical sums of money.
But I do think here we need to distinguish between the investment property and the house that people buy to live in. Because as we know, there's no capital gains tax on your principal place of residence, providing you don't trade in it. And that's basically, I think, been the wealth creation for most Australians who have invested wisely. They've not only had a good lifestyle in the property they've bought, but they've also had a terrific capital growth without tax. As distinct from those people who buy an investment property who do it perhaps because they can negatively gear and get the benefits tax-wise there, but they're still paying capital gains tax. Now, they might be in front as much as they are if they're investing in their principal place of residence, but that's another argument. But I think all those things, the aspiration to own a home, has driven people into housing and upgrading what they're wanting. And of course, you know, if you've got that, it's the old Jones stuff, if you've got that, I want it as well. And a lot of that's taken place over the years, as distinct from 50 years ago, when really it was a very modest market. Capital growth was hardly taking place. Inflation basically didn't exist. Very different circumstances back then.
So, Greville, property trends then, where do you think we're going? I mean, can we keep up? What will we see in another 30 or 40 years?
Well, I think there's been, as I mentioned, there's deregulation, but there's also some other structural things and trends that have occurred in the last 20 or 30 years. And I think one of the major ones is the infrastructure changes that we've had. 1989 to 1999, we had CityLink, and we had Eastlink, and we've had the Northern Ring Road. So all of those structural changes have really changed where we invest and values, because it's just created this ease to move into the CBD, and you can fly down to even down to Geelong much faster now and access those seaside townships. So that's been a real structural change in pricing of houses right around the city. Where we're going from here, I think it's a continued world shift to move closer into the CBD. I mean, the quarter-acre block that we all aspired to, that's really going out the window. Lot sizes are getting much smaller. Typically 30, 40 years ago, they were probably 600, 700, 800 square metre blocks, and now they're typically 300 square metre blocks or even smaller. So people are going to get used to living in smaller spaces. And because they want to be close to the action, the lifestyle, the cafes. Melbourne is all about its villages, and to be able to walk to lifestyle things and have a coffee and that sort of thing.
And I can say, in the context of what Greville's saying, that'll be driven, I think, primarily by the baby boomers, because they don't want their quarter-acre block necessarily anymore. Some of them do, but most don't. And you get the investors wanting a pad to live in rather than go out further into the sticks. A lot of them will buy a little one-bedroom bed-sitter type arrangement close to the city, because that's what the better capital growth is, they're told. And so you'll see a different market, I think, in the next 10 years. But I think we'll see, some still pretty steady gains.
The value of land will really drive, I think, the biggest issue we need to confront over the next decade, which is ensuring affordability by ensuring adequate supply. If we learn anything from the last 5 years where affordability got out of control, was that we didn't have enough homes. So the plans we have of the state government saying they want to increase density and increase the size of the CBD is a good step, because that is a key to ensuring affordability. And that's by delivering housing not just on the city's fringe, but taking advantage of the infrastructure we've got and using that in the city. So there will be greater density, and only by doing that will we ensure that, I suppose those younger than us, can afford housing into the future.
Timothy, Robert, Greville, thanks for joining us. Back with more in a moment.